What's up, y'all? Welcome to another primary source walkthrough. This time we are going to be talking about Teddy Roosevelt on the new nationalism from 1910. So here's how we're going to structure this walkthrough. Number one, we're going to talk a little bit about the context. I'm going to remind you of places in the American Yop that you need to look at and read over one more time before you really try to dive deep into this primary source. We'll talk a little bit about the context of progressivism, 20th century progressivism, right before we dive into the meat of the source, which I think is a really good raw distillation or undistilled version of the philosophy of early 20th century progressivism, at least from the eyes of Teddy Roosevelt, who was off of being president for just a short time and running again in 1912, although he will end up losing. So let's start with the American Yop. And if we go to the Yop right here in chapter 20, the progressive era, you need to read the targeting the trust section closely. And if you scroll down where I have highlighted right here, this is the 4 or 5 paragraphs that you need to read to really understand Roosevelt's progressive philosophy, kind of get an understanding of where he's coming from. You can also get a sense of Roosevelt and his progressivism from reading the section on the environment. Roosevelt is famous for creating national parks, for example, but the chapter doesn't really focus on Roosevelt in this section. If you really want the Roosevelt stuff, it's right here. So let's switch back to the primary source. There it is. And let's talk a little bit about what's been going on in the United States. So remember, with the Gilded Age and the very beginnings of the 20th century in the United States, there's very little regulation on business. And what sparks the progressive movement are several accidents that seem to be prevented, or could have been prevented, had there been some kind of law or regulation that could have stopped tragedy from happening. Of course, one of the best examples of this is the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, where nearly 200 women lose their lives in one of the most grisly events in American history, at least up until that time. Single day events. That isn't a battle. It's you think about the Battle of Antietam, for example, where thousands of men die in the Civil War. It's not quite a comparison. In any case, alongside this need for government regulation and trying to prevent workplace accidents and increasing workplace safety, one of the things that came out of the Gilded Age was a real sense of income inequality, number one, and number two, the sense that these big businesses like Carnegie Steel, which became U.S. Steel, and Rockefeller's Standard Oil, and these big trusts were taking over the United States. And they were having an undue influence on politics, much like we wrestle with this issue today when we think about these big, giant companies like Amazon, Facebook, Walmart, Target, Coca-Cola, Anheuser-Busch, these giant corporations that are just eating up competition, and then also now being able to inject large amounts of money into our politics. There's a lot of connection between then and now, which is why some people have referred to our current era as the Second Gilded Age. I think that's an interesting idea. So what Roosevelt is going to do here is he is going to explain what he thinks are the principles of good government, how government should work for people, and how government should step in with these giant corporations. And it's an interesting title, because when we think of nationalism, we don't think about regulatory policy. We think about this overinflated, almost chauvinistic patriotism gone badly. Like, America is the best and nobody can tell me otherwise, and if you think that America has problems and you hate America and you should leave. Like, that's kind of the feeling that we get when we see the word nationalism. But that's not what Roosevelt's talking about here. So we need to wrestle with that. So let's dive into the source. And he lays out his case right from the beginning here, and he says that every wise struggle to make humanity better has been to achieve equality of opportunity. This is what has allowed nations to rise from barbarism. It's the marker of civilization. And one of the things that we can measure in terms of progress in society is, are we destroying special privilege? And what he means by privilege here is unearned privilege. And that's what he's talking about down below. Or it's like, you know, why should some person, whoever they are, based on their social class, he's not going to say skin color, but we do now, his gender, whatever, why do they automatically get this position of power and status in society that they haven't earned? And it's our job, according to Roosevelt, to destroy this. If we want a true civilization, if we want a real society, then privilege shouldn't exist. That's a really fascinating idea. You know, you can wrestle with the idea if that's even possible, if privilege could truly be destroyed. But that's what he says is the end goal here. There should be no distinction based on unearned qualities. So he's going to say later that if you earn your status, that's one thing. But if you don't earn your status, then you don't deserve the privilege. That's what he's getting at. So he continues. And he makes... I think this is interesting. At the end of that paragraph, he says that this is what you fought for in the Civil War, and that is what we strive for now. And I think what he's saying here is he's saying the Civil War was fought to eliminate slavery, even though it didn't start that way. Let's not revisit that right now. But what he's saying is, because the Civil War was fought in large part, especially towards the second half of the war, to eradicate slavery, that's what the eradication of slavery was, that elimination of unearned privilege, or white privilege in this sense, where white people got to be free and black people had to be slaves based on the color of their skin. White people hadn't earned that, black people didn't deserve that, so the Civil War was fought to end that privilege. I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it. Now, he continues on, and he says that the conflict between men who possess more than they have earned and the men who have earned more than they possess is the central condition of progress. So in the margins, I wrote have versus have-nots, but it's more than that. What he's saying here is he's saying there are men who have more wealth, more opportunity, more of everything that they haven't earned. Okay, they may have earned some of it, but they haven't earned all of it. But there are other men who have worked harder than those wealthy men who have put in that service, who have done everything that they can to make society better, and they have nothing to show for it. And he says that balance between men who have more than they deserve and men who don't have as much as they deserve needs to be brought into balance. That's really the goal of free government, is to make that balance. You get what you earn and no more. And if you have more than what you've earned, we need to do something about it. So again, he's talking about equalizing opportunity, destroying privilege, etc. And he says that he is all about for fair play. But more than that, he says, look, I'm all about for fair play, but I also understand that in order to make that play fair, there needs to be changes to the rules. Because the rules of our society are written in such a way that favor one class over another. And he goes on and he says, look, this means that our government at every level has to be freed from the influence and control of special interests. And what he means by special interest in this instance is he means big business. And if you think about, if we go back to the YOP for just a second after I center this, if we go back to the YOP, it's no surprise that the textbook decides to talk about Roosevelt in terms of his busting of trust, these giant corporations. He's really acting on what he believes here. So that's a good way to make some connection to the historical context from what he's talking about here. So what he says is we need to get these special business interests under control. We need to protect their property, but we can't allow corporations and these special businesses, etc., to control our politics. And he says it should the shoe should be on the other foot. That our politics, our government, should be able to control these mighty commercial forces, which is what he says right here. We've called these into being, but now we need to make sure that we constrain them and regulate them, because if we let them take over, then we're going to run into problems, and the end goal of society to eliminate the inequality of opportunity and the destruction of privilege. If we allow businesses to continue on unrestrained, then we're never going to meet our goals. So he says very clearly, laws should be passed to prohibit the use of corporate funds directly or indirectly for political purposes. Now, if you pay attention to politics in the late 20th century and early 21st century, you will know that it is perfectly legal now for corporations to inject almost unlimited amounts of cash into political campaigns, usually through political action committees or super PACs. It's a problem, and this was a decision made by the Supreme Court in a case called Citizens United. Teddy Roosevelt would not have appreciated that decision. Hence why I wrote, if he could only see 2021 in the margins. So he says very clearly that we cannot have corporate masters. And I think this is one of those things that we don't always consider in American history. And it's something that we are going to have to wrestle with as historians as time goes on, because usually we focus on free versus the unfree, which is an important thing to do, especially in History 1301. We tend to think of the rich versus the poor, and we don't necessarily think about how government regulation or the lack of government regulation really steers the course of American history. And one of the things that you can think about is who should have more control over the American populace, or who should direct the American experiment better. Should it be corporations and business, or should it be politicians? And right now you could come to the conclusion that corporations control the politicians, therefore the politicians are corrupt beyond belief, and we've got to do something about that. But it's something that we've got to wrestle with, this struggle between business and government and how it shapes our social and cultural realities. That's something that we as a society have to wrestle with. And I think that's what Teddy Roosevelt is wrestling with here. And he's making the clear decision that government is better suited for the task, not business. Business is out of control. Business is all about selfishness, is kind of what's written in between the lines here. Now, he starts to wrap up here and he says, look, no man should receive $1 unless that dollar had been earned. But he continues and he says, man, like, you should actually earn that dollar for the service you provide, not through stocks and gambling, which is, you know, what kind of the stock market is. I mean, please see GameStop in the last, month, right? Like, that was a huge gamble. It's what it was. So he's saying, like, that's not how you should earn money. Like, that's ridiculous. Money should be given when you earn it, not because you invested in this way, this corporation or that corporation. And he says, even if you can do this, there needs to be some way to recoup some of that unearned money and distribute it across the rest of the nation, which is why he's talking about a graduated income tax and he's talking about inheritance taxes. These are big ticket items for 21st century progressives. Look at our politics. You can agree with them or disagree with them, but like I wrote in the column here, this sounds a lot like Elizabeth Warren. It sounds like a lot like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They are talking about these exact things, and here is Teddy Roosevelt talking about them back in 1910. It's an interesting kind of parallel. He ends by calling all of this the new nationalism. So remember at the beginning we talked about nationalism as this kind of chauvinistic patriotism. Well, what he's saying here is this fixing of society, this progressive way of understanding the role of government to regulate business, to equal opportunity and destroy privilege. That's what this new nationalism is. This new progressive idea of what government can be. And if you look at the election in 1912, even though Teddy Roosevelt loses, the candidates, who are William Howard Taft, Woodrow Wilson, and Teddy Roosevelt, those are the big three candidates. So the Republican is Taft, Wilson's the Democrat, and then Roosevelt, who was a Republican, starts a new political party called the Bull Moose Party or the Progressive Party. They're all running on a progressive platform, all of them, which is fascinating, I think. Now, when we get a little bit further down the line, like by the time we get to the end of the Wilson presidency and we get new blood into the White House, particularly Warren G. Harding, that philosophy is going to change. But for now, all parties agree that the progressive agenda is the way to go forward. Even the Republican Party, even the Democratic Party, even the Progressive Party. Obviously they do. So This is a really good snapshot of what it means to be a progressive in 1910 through Teddy Roosevelt's eyes. And I hope this helps you understand this progressive mindset. And I hope you keep it in mind as we go forward in the class. And when we get to the 1920s, like I was just saying, we can contrast this with the new pro-business platform the Republican Party is going to bring forward with Warren G. Harding, Calvin Coolidge, and Herbert Hoover in succession. So that's going to wrap up this primary source walkthrough. If you have any questions on Teddy Roosevelt, the new nationalism, progressivism, leave a comment down below. Send me an email if you're one of my students. I'm happy to help you try to understand this source a little bit better. I hope that this was at least engaging and intriguing for you, and I hope you turn in for the next one. If you could leave a like, comment, and consider subscribing to the channel, that would be awesome. That would help me press forward on this content a little bit more and encourage me to up my video making game. So I hope you stay tuned for the next primary source walkthrough coming soon to the channel next week. So I'll see you then, guys. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time. Later.